I never expected my son would say something like that at Christmas. "Enjoying the $5,000 a month, Mom?" he asked, his voice light. But the words hit me like a slap across the face. Mark, my only son, had always been my pride and joy. I raised him, supported him, and spent countless sleepless nights worrying about his future. But here we were, at a Christmas party, surrounded by family and friends, and the words he spoke were cold and dismissive. The room seemed to shrink around me as his words echoed in my head. $5,000 a month. He was talking about the money he'd been sending me, supposedly to help cover my living expenses since I had retired. But now, it felt like a token, a mere handout from a man who once looked up to me with respect. It wasn't about the money. It was about the message. The message that I was nothing more than a burden, something to be tolerated, as long as I didn't get in the way of his perfect, comfortable life. I had spent years putting my heart and soul into this family, into him, and now, I was just another responsibility to him. The shock was so strong that I couldn't even react right away. I just smiled, trying to keep my composure, but inside, a storm was brewing. My eyes scanned the room, but no one seemed to notice the shift. Mark hugged me tightly, his smile genuine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all for show. He was playing the part of the loving son, but beneath it all, I saw the truth. The truth that I was just a piece in his carefully constructed life. A part he had to tolerate. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was numb. I tried to push the feeling down, but it kept rising, bubbling to the surface. I had always prided myself on being the one who kept the family together, the one who made sure everyone had what they needed. But now, at the Christmas party, it was clear, I was not a part of his plans anymore. He didn't need me. I wasn't wanted. And that realization hit harder than any words he could have said. After a few moments of awkward silence, I took a deep breath, composed myself, and made my way to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The laughter and chatter of the party went on, but I was lost in my own thoughts. As I walked, I couldn't help but think back to the years I spent raising Mark, giving him everything I had, and now here I was, alone in my own family, alone in the place I had once felt the most at home. I wasn't sure how to move forward, but I knew one thing for certain. The person I thought I knew, the son I had raised, was not the same person standing before me now. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, the laughter and chatter of the party swirling around me like a distant echo. The words Mark had said to me at the Christmas party continued to play on a loop in my mind. "Enjoying the $5,000 a month, Mom?" His voice still rang in my ears, but now, it felt colder, sharper. I tried to focus on the tasks at hand, setting the table and preparing the food, but my hands trembled as I worked. It was as if the warmth and joy I had always associated with family gatherings had been drained from me, leaving behind only emptiness. I felt like an outsider in my own home. I had been so excited for this Christmas. For weeks, I had carefully planned the meal, chosen the perfect wine, and decorated the house with lights and ornaments. I had imagined us all gathered around the table, laughing and sharing stories like we had done in the past. But now, as I set the plates out, I realized that the family I had so carefully tried to hold together had already begun to unravel. Mark had been distant for months, even years. I had noticed the changes in him, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he no longer called as often. But I had always pushed those thoughts aside, telling myself it was just a phase, that he was busy with work, that he was just caught up in his life. But now, I could see the truth. It wasn't just the distance. It was the indifference. He had moved on, and I was no longer a priority in his life. As I finished setting the table, I glanced at the clock. It was almost time for dinner, and I had done everything I could to make the evening special. But despite my efforts, I could feel the tension in the air. The house, once filled with love and laughter, now felt cold and foreign. I tried to push the feelings aside, but they kept creeping back. The words Mark had said were like a knife twisting in my chest. $5,000 a month. The amount seemed so insignificant, yet the way he had said it, as if it were nothing more than a favor, a charity he was offering, made it feel like a slap in the face. The truth hit me then. I had been nothing more than an obligation to him. A responsibility he had to fulfill. A way to ease his conscience, to keep me out of his way so he could enjoy his perfect life. I wondered when it had all changed. When had I gone from being his mother to being a burden? The questions swirled in my mind, but I didn't have the answers. The silence in the house was deafening. Mark and his wife, Jennifer, finally arrived, walking into the dining room with their usual smiles. But even their smiles felt fake now, like they were performing for an audience. They exchanged pleasantries with me, but I could see the distance in their eyes. I could feel the coldness that had crept between us. I forced a smile and tried to make small talk, but it felt like I was talking to strangers. As the night wore on, I found myself retreating into the background, watching as Mark and Jennifer laughed and joked with the other guests. I sat there, alone in a room full of people, feeling more isolated than I had ever felt in my life. The words kept echoing in my mind. Enjoying the $5,000 a month, Mom? I had always thought that family was supposed to be a source of support, a place where you could find comfort and love. But now, I realized how wrong I had been. Family wasn't a sanctuary for me anymore. It was a reminder of everything I had lost, and I had no idea how to get it back. I woke up the next morning with a sense of heaviness in my chest. The Christmas party was over, but the unease still lingered in the air. I went through the motions of getting ready for the day, but my mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Mark the night before. The words he had said kept replaying in my head. Enjoying the $5,000 a month, Mom? I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, and I was too old to ignore it any longer. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. The house was quiet, too quiet. The laughter and chatter of the party had faded away, and now I was left alone with my thoughts. It was a familiar feeling, this loneliness, but it hit differently now. I had spent so many years making sure that Mark and his family were happy, making sure their lives were comfortable. I had sacrificed my time, my energy, and my peace of mind to create a home for them. But now, it felt like none of that mattered. Mark had his life, his family, his wealth, and I was just here, alone. I had always believed that family was supposed to be a source of support, a place where you could find comfort when the world became too heavy. But now, I was starting to wonder if I had been wrong all these years. I had spent so much time focusing on everyone else's happiness that I had neglected my own. The realization stung, but it wasn't new. I had seen the signs for months, maybe even years, but I had been too afraid to face the truth. I had convinced myself that Mark's distance was just a phase, that he was too busy with his life, his career, and his wife. I had told myself that it was normal, that this was just what happens as people grow older and life gets in the way. But now I knew better. The distance wasn't a phase. It was intentional. It was a choice. And that choice was to push me out of the picture. I thought about the times Mark had come over for dinner and barely looked me in the eye. I thought about the birthday cards and holiday greetings that were more like afterthoughts than gestures of love. I thought about how he no longer called me just to check in, no longer asked how I was doing, no longer seemed to care. I had always been there for him. I had been the one who wiped his tears when he was young, the one who stayed up late to help him with his homework, the one who cooked his favorite meals when he came home from college. But now, all of that seemed to mean nothing. I wasn't his priority anymore. And the worst part was, I didn't even know why. What had changed? What had I done wrong? I felt the tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I wasn't going to cry. Not for him. Not for this. Instead, I picked up my phone and texted Mark. I hadn't spoken to him since last night, and I wasn't sure what to say. But something inside me told me I had to say something. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. We need to talk. I typed and pressed send before I could second-guess myself. As I sat there, waiting for a response, I realized that I had spent too much time worrying about everyone else and not enough time taking care of myself. I had let my son slip away, let my role in his life diminish, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a broken relationship. But I wasn't going to let this go on. Not anymore. I wasn't going to let him treat me like I was invisible. I wasn't going to let him think that $5,000 a month was enough to make up for the years of love and sacrifice I had given him. I was more than that. I was his mother, and I deserved better than to be discarded like I didn't matter. The text message blinked on my phone, but there was no response. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but nothing came. The silence was suffocating, and I realized then that this was no longer about the money. It was about respect. It was about reclaiming my place in my family. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Mark's indifference define me anymore. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I stared at my phone, hoping for a reply from Mark, but the screen remained unchanged. No messages. No calls. I tried to push away the feeling of being completely forgotten, but it clung to me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, and I realized I had been sitting there for far too long, letting the weight of the situation pull me deeper into despair. I got up, pacing the kitchen floor, my mind racing with thoughts of everything I had done for him over the years. All the sacrifices I made, the long nights staying up, the endless support, the love. And this was how I was repaid. By being ignored. By being treated as if I no longer mattered. I had given so much, and now I was nothing more than a distant memory in his life. It wasn't just the money, it was the way he saw me. It was the way he dismissed me, like I was just another item on a list of things he had to take care of. His comment about the $5,000 a month stung more than I could explain. It wasn't about the amount. It was the way he said it, like it was a favor he was doing for me, something that should make me grateful. But all I felt was resentment. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to enough. I had raised him, cared for him, and now I was being treated like a charity case. I needed more than just money. I needed respect. I needed love. I needed to feel like I mattered to him. But as the minutes passed, I realized that if I waited for him to give me that respect, I would be waiting forever. I couldn't sit back and let this continue. I couldn't let him think that he could keep treating me this way. It was time to take action. I didn't know what that action would be yet, but I knew it would have to come from me. I couldn't rely on him to fix this, because he didn't even see the problem. It was up to me to reclaim my life, to stop letting his indifference define who I was. I grabbed my purse and headed out the door. The cool air hit me as I stepped outside, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't going to sit at home anymore, waiting for a call that would never come. I wasn't going to waste another minute hoping for something that wasn't going to happen. It was time to take control of my own future, to stop living in the shadow of a son who no longer cared. As I drove through the streets, I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. I needed to make a change for myself. And it started with walking away from the life I had known. Walking away from the constant disappointment. Walking away from the belief that I had to accept being treated like this. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. I was not going to let Mark, or anyone, make me feel small anymore. I was more than that. And I was going to remind myself of it every day, starting now. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The roads blurred as I passed the familiar landmarks I had known for years, but they no longer felt the same. The house I had lived in for so long, the streets where I had raised my family, everything had shifted. I had spent decades building a life for Mark and me, and now, in just a few short moments, it felt like all of it was crumbling. As I drove, I realized I needed to make a decision. I couldn't just keep running away from the pain. I had to face it head on. The realization hit me. I was no longer the person I used to be. The woman who spent her life supporting her family, the one who gave everything for others, was gone. That woman had faded into the background, replaced by someone new. Someone who was ready to take control. I pulled into a small park, the place where I used to bring Mark when he was a child. It was quiet now, almost deserted, but it felt like the right place to pause, to think. I stepped out of the car and took a deep breath. The air was cool and crisp, the kind of weather that always made me feel alive. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew it was time to stop living in the past. I had spent so much time clinging to the memories of what was, but I realized now that I needed to look forward. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't change how Mark treated me, but I could change how I responded. I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need his approval or his charity. I had spent too many years allowing myself to be defined by my role as a mother, as a wife, as someone who put everyone else's needs before my own. But now, it was time to put myself first. I sat on one of the park benches and thought about the future. I thought about the life I had left to live. I wasn't ready to give up yet. I wasn't ready to fade into the background. There was still so much left for me to do, so many things I had put on hold for far too long. I could feel the fire inside me reignite, a quiet determination building within me. I would take control of my life. I would do what made me happy. I didn't need Mark's approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was enough, just as I was. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. It wasn't a freedom that came from escaping my problems. It was a freedom that came from accepting them, from acknowledging the hurt, and moving forward anyway. I stood up from the bench, feeling a sense of purpose. It was time to go home. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew that I wasn't going to let anyone take away my peace anymore. I had spent too many years sacrificing myself for others. Now it was my turn to live. As I drove back home, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to face it. And I wasn't going to let anyone tell me I wasn't worth it. I arrived home later that evening, feeling a quiet resolve that had been missing for so long. The house was just as I had left it, still, silent, and seemingly unchanged. But I knew now that I had changed. The realization hit. Me in waves, each one stronger than the last. I wasn't the same woman who had lived in this house for years, trying to keep everything together for Mark, for my family. I had spent so much of my life running on autopilot, trying to please everyone around me, even when it meant sacrificing my own happiness. But no more. I wasn't going to be the invisible, disregarded mother anymore. I had let them push me aside for too long, but now, I was going to reclaim my life. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet settle around me. The house felt different now, not in the way it used to, filled with the laughter of family gatherings and the comfort of being needed. No, it was different in a way that felt empowering. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do, but I knew that I needed to stop waiting. I needed to stop hoping that Mark would suddenly see me, see all that I had done, and come rushing back with an apology. That wasn't going to happen. I had spent so many years hoping for that, and all it had brought me was disappointment. I didn't need him to validate me anymore. It was time to find validation within myself. I had always been the one to pick up the pieces, to hold everything together. But now, I was starting to realize that I didn't have to carry that weight alone. I didn't have to wait for someone else to recognize my worth. I could do that for myself. I walked into the living room, the space where so many memories had been made. It was the room where Mark and I had spent countless hours together, laughing, talking, sharing our lives. But now it felt empty, not because of the absence of people, but because of the absence of meaning. It wasn't home anymore. It was just a house, a place I had filled with memories, but now it was time to create new memories. I wasn't going to let the past define me anymore. I sat down in the armchair, looking around the room. I noticed the old photos on the mantelpiece, the family vacations, the birthdays, the moments of joy. They seemed so distant now. I had poured everything into those moments, giving so much of myself to my family, hoping that they would appreciate it, hoping that they would see the love and care I had put into every little thing. But now, I realized that it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough, not for them. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. I didn't need their approval to be happy. I didn't need their acknowledgement to feel like I had value. I had spent so much time thinking I needed them, but now, I knew that I could stand on my own. I could build a life for myself, independent of anyone else. It was scary, of course. The thought of being on my own, truly on my own, was a daunting one. But it was also freeing. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance to breathe, to live for myself. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew it would have to start with me. I wasn't going to sit around anymore, waiting for something to change. I was going to change. I was going to start taking the steps to build a life that was mine. I didn't need Mark or anyone else to validate me. I could validate myself. I got up from the chair and walked to the kitchen, feeling a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. It was time to take control. It was time to stop living in the shadow of a past that no longer served me. And though I didn't know exactly where I was going, I knew that I was going to get there on my own terms. I spent the next few days in a haze, still trying to wrap my head around everything that had happened. The realization that I had been living a life of quiet neglect, trying to make myself invisible in my own family, had hit harder than I expected. Mark's words echoed in my head at odd moments. Enjoying the $5,000 a month, Mom? And each time, it was like a sharp sting in my chest. But as the days passed, I began to feel something else. A spark, a sense of something more. I was done feeling small. I was done being the woman who waited for validation from others, who had put her life on hold for the sake of a family that no longer saw her. It wasn't easy, but I knew deep down that I needed to take back control. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. I wasn't going to sit in my house, watching the world move on without me. I was going to do something about it. I started small. I signed up for a few classes at the local community center, nothing too extravagant, just things I had always wanted to try. Painting, yoga, even a little course on creative writing. At first, I wasn't sure if I could even make it to the first class. It felt like a lifetime since I had done something just for myself. But when I walked into that first painting class, I felt something shift inside me. The room was filled with strangers, people of all ages, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. The instructor, a kind woman in her early 40s, welcomed me with a smile. She didn't know my story, didn't know the pain I was carrying, but in that moment, it didn't matter. It was just me, the brush, and the canvas. It wasn't about perfection. It was about expression. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like I was finally taking a step towards something more. Something just for me. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself looking forward to those moments. I even began to meet people, make friends, and engage in conversations that didn't involve my son or his wife or anyone else in my family. It was liberating. It was as if I was discovering parts of myself I had long forgotten. Little by little, I began to feel stronger, more independent, and I realized that I had been waiting for permission to live my life, but I didn't need anyone's permission. I was going to live it on my own terms. Of course, there were still moments when doubt crept in, when I wondered if I was making the right choices. But each time that happened, I reminded myself that I was no longer waiting for someone else to make me feel worthy. I was doing it for myself. It was a long process, but with every small step I took, I felt more at peace with my decision. I wasn't going to chase after my son's approval or try to win his affection. I wasn't going to beg for his time or attention. I wasn't going to let my life revolve around him and the family that had slowly pushed me aside. I was going to find happiness in the things that brought me joy, in the little moments that made me feel alive. And most importantly, I was going to live without waiting for validation. I had spent too long in the shadows, letting everyone else take the spotlight. It was time to step into the light. It was time for me to be my own priority. The days continued to pass by, and with each one, I felt more grounded, more myself than I had in years. The small classes, the quiet moments of reflection, and the new friendships I was beginning to form had brought a sense of peace I had long forgotten. But even as I made these strides toward independence, there were still moments when the weight of the past would try to creep back in. It happened one evening, as I sat alone in the living room, sipping my tea. The phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up, seeing Mark's name flashing on the screen. My heart skipped a beat, but I took a breath and hit the decline button without hesitation. It wasn't easy, but I had learned that I didn't need to be available to him whenever he decided to reach out. I had spent so many years bending over backward for him, making sure his life was perfect, that I had lost sight of myself. But now, for the first time, I was taking control of my own life. A few days later, I decided it was time to visit the place I had avoided for so long, Mark's house. I hadn't been there in months. It felt strange, almost foreign, but I knew it was time to face the reality of what had happened. I couldn't keep running away from it. I arrived at his house, the same place where we had once shared family dinners, birthdays, and holidays. I stood at the door for a moment, the weight of the years settling on my shoulders. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this confrontation, but I knew it was something I had to do. Mark answered the door, looking surprised to see me. His eyes shifted uneasily, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "Mom, it's been a while," he said, his voice stiff, as if he were trying to act casual. I nodded, stepping inside, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. As I looked around, I noticed how different everything felt. The house that had once been filled with laughter and warmth now felt cold, distant, like it belonged to someone else. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us thick and heavy. I could feel the tension in the air, and I knew that we both knew there was something that had to be said, something that had been left unspoken for far too long. "Mark," I began, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "I need to talk to you about what happened. About everything that's been going on." He shifted in his seat, looking down at his hands. "Mom, I don't know what you want me to say," he said quietly, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "I'm doing the best I can." I swallowed, fighting back the wave of emotion that threatened to take over. "I understand that," I said, my voice firm. But what I don't understand is how I went from being your mother, the one who raised you, to being someone you barely acknowledge. I gave everything for you, Mark. And now, you've distanced yourself from me, like I don't matter." His eyes met mine for the first time, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in them. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by the familiar wall he had built around himself. "It's not like that, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've just got a lot going on. Life's been crazy, you know." I shook my head, my heart aching with the weight of his words. "I understand that life is busy, but I shouldn't have to feel like an afterthought in your life. I shouldn't have to beg for your time or your attention. I gave you everything I had, Mark, and now I'm left with nothing." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought he might say something, but instead, he looked away, his expression hardening. I stood up slowly, taking a deep breath as I looked down at him. "I'm done waiting for you to see me, Mark. I'm done hoping that you'll come around and treat me like I matter. I'm not going to beg you for the love and respect I deserve." I turned and walked toward the door, my heart heavy but resolute. As I stepped outside, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. This was it. I had finally spoken my truth. And no matter what happened next, I knew that I was no longer going to wait for Mark or anyone else to determine my worth. I was going to live my life for myself on my own terms. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet reflection, still absorbing the weight of the conversation I had with Mark. I wasn't sure if I had expected a different outcome, but I knew deep down that the conversation needed to happen. It wasn't about finding closure with him. It was about finding it for myself. I had spent far too long sacrificing my own peace, waiting for him to come around, for him to see how much I had given for him, and for the family. But that moment had passed. I wasn't going to waste another second of my life hoping for something that wasn't going to happen. I had learned the hard way that I had to live my life for me, not for someone else's approval or love. A few weeks had passed, and the sting of Mark's words still lingered, but with each passing day, it became easier to breathe. I started to focus on the things that mattered to me, the things I had neglected for far too long. I enrolled in more classes, explored new hobbies, and reconnected with old friends. The world seemed bigger now, full of possibilities I had been too afraid to embrace before. I wasn't living in the shadows anymore. I was living for myself, carving out a new identity, one that wasn't tied to the expectations of my son or anyone else. One day, as I was out for a walk in the park, I ran into an old friend of mine, Carol. We hadn't spoken in years, but as soon as she saw me, she walked over with a big smile. "Linda, is that really you?" she exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with recognition. It was so good to see her. We sat on a bench, catching up on life, and I realized just how much I had missed this kind of connection. Carol told me about her family, about her own struggles, and we laughed about the old days. But what struck me most was how easy it was to talk to her. She listened, really listened, and for the first time in a long time, I felt heard. Carol and I made plans to meet up again soon. I walked away from the park feeling lighter, more hopeful than I had in years. The weight of Mark's indifference no longer felt like a burden on my shoulders. I wasn't defined by his rejection or anyone else's opinions. I was defined by the life I was creating for myself. The days turned into weeks, and each day felt like a step toward reclaiming my independence. I began to spend more time with people who valued me, people who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could give. And slowly, something shifted inside me. I started to feel like myself again, like the woman I had been before I lost sight of who I was. Mark had never truly seen me, not the way I wanted him to. He had seen what he wanted to see, a mother who would always be there to take care of him, to make his life easier. But I wasn't just his mother. I was more than that. I was a person with my own dreams, my own desires, and my own worth. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even him, take that away from me. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over it. I wasn't going to let anyone tell me what my life should look like. It was mine to shape, mine to live. I could hear the laughter of my new friends, the conversations that made me feel alive, and I realized that this was just the beginning. I was finally free. Free to be myself, free to live the life I had always wanted, without waiting for anyone's permission. As I walked through the streets, feeling the warm sun on my face, I knew I was on the right path. It had taken a long time to get here, but I was finally where I needed to be. And that felt like enough. In this deeply emotional family story, a woman struggles to regain her sense of self after years of being neglected by her own son. For too long, she has played the role of the perfect mother, sacrificing her own happiness to please others. As time passes, she begins to realize that her son has distanced himself, leaving her to confront the painful reality of being overlooked and taken for granted. In this journey through family stories, she slowly comes to terms with the fact that she deserves more than just financial support. She deserves respect, love, and independence. As she moves forward, she reconnects with her past, stepping out of the shadows of her family's expectations and discovering new joys in life. Through this personal transformation, she finds strength and freedom in the face of betrayal and disconnection. This powerful family story highlights the resilience of a woman who refuses to let her worth be defined by others, ultimately embracing the power to reclaim her life and happiness. As the narrative unfolds, it serves as a poignant reminder that family stories can evolve, and that sometimes it's necessary to walk away in order to find peace and rediscover one's true self. Character 1 is a white woman in her late 60s. She has short gray hair and a gentle yet determined expression. She is wearing a cozy sweater and slacks. Her posture is straight but relaxed. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. The image should be realistic with natural lighting. Character 2 is a white man in his early 40s. He has short dark brown hair and a clean-shaven face. His expression is slightly tense with a hint of indifference. He is wearing a smart casual shirt and jeans. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. The image should be realistic with natural lighting. 1. A heated confrontation. The scene is tense and charged with emotion. The first character, a woman in her late 60s, stands firm, facing her son, the second character, who appears distant and cold. The background is darkened, adding to the tension of the moment. She stands in her living room, looking him directly in the eye, while he stares back with an unreadable expression. The space between them feels heavy, filled with unspoken resentment. Their body language speaks volumes. She's poised and determined, while he's defensive, trying to avoid the confrontation. The air is thick with unsaid words as they stand on opposite sides, the atmosphere crackling with the impending emotional storm. 2. Character 1 in daily life. The woman, looking calm and composed, is in her home, preparing a quiet dinner for herself. The kitchen is warmly lit, reflecting the solitude she now embraces. She moves with a sense of grace and routine, carefully chopping vegetables and arranging food, her movements steady and sure. The kitchen, filled with familiar items and soft lighting, provides a stark contrast to the isolation she feels. Though she smiles faintly, there's a clear sadness in her eyes, a quiet resignation as she goes about her evening alone, symbolizing her emotional journey towards self-realization and independence. 3. Character 2 in daily life. The man, now in his early 40s, is in a sleek, modern office, dressed sharply in business attire. His expression is tense and focused as he goes over paperwork at his desk. The office space is clean, minimalist, a reflection of his highly organized, but emotionally distant nature. As he answers a phone call, his body language is closed off, giving little away. He's efficient but detached, only interacting with the world as necessary. He's clearly burdened by his responsibilities, yet there's an underlying void, a sense of emptiness that's barely visible to anyone around him. The cold, stark office mirrors the distance he has placed between himself and others, especially his mother. 4. The tense meeting. Both characters are in the same room once again, but this time, the tension has escalated. They're seated across from one another in a bright, almost sterile lawyer's office, with a third person, an attorney, acting as a neutral mediator. The woman is holding herself together, her posture still, but there's a palpable intensity in her eyes. The man, though outwardly calm, is fidgeting, avoiding direct eye contact. The atmosphere is charged with unspoken history, old wounds resurfacing in the cold, professional space. The attorney is watching them both, sensing the emotional distance and trying to maintain control of the situation, but the moment feels like a ticking time bomb. The feeling of betrayal lingers heavily in the air. 5. A moment of reconnection. The woman is attending a painting class at a local community center. The room is filled with natural light, and the soft hum of conversation from other participants fills the space. She is lost in her work, painting with an almost meditative focus. For the first time in a while, she feels at peace, surrounded by people who don't expect anything from her. There's a moment where she glances up and catches the eye of a fellow student, a woman about her age, who smiles warmly at her. It's a brief but meaningful moment of connection, reminding her that she is not invisible, that she is worthy of love and respect. 6. The final stand. The last scene takes place in the woman's home. It's a quiet evening, and the setting sun casts a golden light through the windows. The woman stands in front of a mirror, looking at herself with a sense of quiet determination. She's dressed in comfortable clothes, her hair neatly styled, and there's a soft, confident smile on her face. She's no longer waiting for anyone's approval. Her reflection shows a woman who has fought for her place, for her voice, and has finally found peace within herself. The camera pulls back, and we see her walking away from the mirror, moving forward into her future with the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes.